Hey everyone, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all who all are joining us globally. My name is Parth, and I am the program manager for reactor programs in India. Yes, I welcome you all to yet another session of Tech Expresso with our own very busy host Karan M.V. So let's not delay. I like to bring it. I like to bring Karan up now. But before we start the session, let's go through our code of conduct. We are all here to learn together. So please be respectful of other people's views, understanding of differences, being kind, and considerate in a way we all engage. Yes, we do encourage you all to participate. Ask questions. Yes, please drop all your questions in the chat section. Now, I would not delay much more and like to bring up Karan. Hey Karan, hi, how are you doing? Sorry, I'm in a ghost mode today.
Hi Parth, thanks for having me over here. I'm doing well. How are you?
I am all good, enjoying Bangalore's climate. It's mesmerizing.
Lovely it is. And such a great day to have this session as well because, well, it's magic.
Right time for Tech Espresso and right time for a coffee espresso as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Parth.
Yes, Karan. Can we start the session with a small intro of yours and then we can begin the session. Yep.
Sounds good. Thanks everyone for joining in. Before we get started, I would say that it's such an apt time to talk about Tech Espresso. I do have my cup of coffee over here, not an espresso, but well, it's good enough for me to keep me going. I hope you also have one of your cups of coffee over here as I walk you through today's session. But before that, hello everyone. I'm Karan, and I lead developer relations for international markets at GitHub. I'm based in India, and I really love talking to all of you developers, whether be it you're working in an enterprise, in startup, you're a student, or you're an institution, or any other place. I really like working with all of the developers, the open source ecosystem maintainers, and many other folks in helping them with their journey on GitHub and open source and how they can better their practices. And one of the things that we have seen in the recent past is how generative AI is really helping with software development in today's world and really helping with productivity itself for developers. And which is why I want to talk about how you can use GitHub Copilot to improve your developer productivity. And if you're thinking, yes, we are going to have some demos as well about it, but I want to talk about a little bit around Copilot and also how it's beneficial, what we have seen, and also give you an example use case of how you can tap into the various features that are there. But before that, again, a reminder what Parth mentioned, please be respectful of each other. Let's have a very great discussion and interaction in this session. While I'm going through my a few slides and presentation, I won't be able to take a look at the chat, but please do put in any of your questions. Once I'm done with my demo, we can have a good discussion around whatever questions that you have. All right, so let's get started with GitHub Copilot. First of all, to be honest, I would be a little surprised if you haven't heard of GitHub Copilot yet. But let's get into the basics. What is GitHub Copilot? All right. Well, in a very simple terms, GitHub Copilot is an AI pair programmer that helps you write code faster with less work. And I really want to emphasize the word or the phrase AI pair programmer. All right. Now, GitHub Copilot has really helped redefine productivity for millions of developers by introducing them to the magic of AI assisted software development. And basically, GitHub Copilot is a cloud based AI tool developed by GitHub and OpenAI to assist users of Visual Studio, VS Code, NeoVim, JetBrains, etc., by suggesting lines of code and even whole functions instantly. So with GitHub Copilot, you can say, for example, write a regular expression, or even interact with an API, or however you want to work with for the very first time, even if you're using it without leaving your editor. So you can do all of that within your editor itself. So for those of you who are, who have heard about this for the first time, or wondering how all of this works, you might be wondering, hmm, is it really magic? Is there something happening over here? Right? Which is why we use the terms AI pair programmer and the phrase copilot, because this tool cannot work without you, the developer, right? It's not the pilot, it's a co-pilot with which you can use, seated along you or within your editor in this case, to really help with your development. So it's not magic. It cannot read minds and then say, "Uh-huh, I thought you said that," but although sometimes it really feels like it can. So however, by sharing things like code completion, based on the project's context and style conventions, GitHub Copilot can really help increase velocity and confidence as a programmer. I can tell you very confidently that for me, it definitely has. So I'm a full stack engineer and also DevOps engineer myself, who usually used to code in Python, but right now I usually do a lot more of Ruby and some of the other DevOps pipelines. Even I have seen this work very well with a whole lot of programming languages that I use myself. Anyway, if it's not magic, then what exactly is it? All right. So, to give you a little bit of context, GitHub Copilot really draws context from the comments and the code that are there, and really suggests individual lines and even whole functions instantly. So GitHub Copilot, is powered by OpenAI Codex, and it's an OpenAI model that translates natural language into code. It's a version of GPT-3 which uses deep learning to produce a human-like text. So a lot of organizations are using that. However, GitHub Copilot is really fine-tuned for programming tasks. Now, what really happens in the backend when you are using GitHub Copilot? A very, very sneak peek. I won't go into a whole lot more details, but essentially, your editor provides context to GitHub Copilot. So GitHub Copilot uses the AI model behind the scenes, and it returns suggestions to your editor where you choose what to accept or what to ignore. So it provides context from the local files. And it's important to remember it's not attached to a repository. It's only based on the context from the local files that you have open in your editor. So it stores data in a very ephemeral way. It's shared just for long enough for GitHub Copilot to provide a suggestion. We do not take that code and put it back into the data model for suggestions, and it's available just long enough for GitHub Copilot to provide a suggestion. So GitHub Copilot is available right now for Visual Studio Code, Visual Studio itself, NeoVim, and JetBrains IDEs. So that's a little bit brief about GitHub Copilot. However, what are the main features or use cases how you can really start using GitHub Copilot? Now, I'm sure you would have seen this in multiple different places whenever you're using with your own development or in other places. But I would categorize essentially the main features as three things. All right. One is it can help you convert comments to code. So, for example, if you describe the logic that you want in a natural language, GitHub Copilot can help you assemble the code for you. So, you can see one example on the screen, but we're going to go through some more live examples. The second thing is autofill some repetitive code. I am sure how many times you are writing, a script or something like this, where there is some specific pattern or a boilerplate or a code pattern which you have to write again and again. Say similar days you would have to write, or you would have to write, say, a date picker or something with just specific dates, or even regex of some sort, etc., you would be bored kind of repeating the same thing, right? So GitHub Copilot, that's where it can help you really autofill some of this repetitive code. And the best part is that it can also help you show alternatives. So it's not something that just gives you one solution, but most often gives you a list of solutions that you can use as provided, or even accept it, reject it, and edit it to meet your needs. So those are some of the really key things how GitHub Copilot features can help you with the development. Now, one of the things is that GitHub Copilot is, continuously improving and also helping all of the developers. So if you look at GitHub Copilot since, say, June 2022, when Codex was upgraded, the code acceptance rate was 27%. And as and when there have been version upgrades of Codex, the code acceptance rate has been increasing, which means that GitHub Copilot is able to give you more and more better and accurate suggestions which you intended. So this helps you reduce the frequency of unwanted suggestions, which might sometime prove disruptive to a developer's workflow, and also helps you better understand the context for GitHub Copilot as well. Now, there are also a few things where GitHub Copilot has very interesting use cases what folks would have used, or even you yourself would want to explore, which is it can also in some extent help you lessen your security vulnerabilities. Very common things like, for example, hard-coded credentials and things like that. This is a little bit different compared to GitHub's advanced security and other products, but one of the use cases where it would be helpful. So, GitHub Copilot is, again, available for individuals as well as businesses. So that way, as a business, you can purchase GitHub Copilot to manage licenses and policy from a central location using your existing GitHub organizations itself. And also there are a few other features. For example, we built a filter to really help detect and suppress some of the GitHub Copilot suggestions which contain code that matches public code on GitHub. So, for example, some of the individual users have the choice to really enable that filter during setup on their individual accounts. And even Copilot for business users, the enterprise administrator can control how the filter is applied. So essentially, with this filter enabled, GitHub Copilot checks the code suggestions with its surrounding code for matches or even near matches, of course, ignoring white space, against any public code on GitHub of about 150 characters. So if there's a match, the suggestion will not be shown to you. So you can check out the GitHub Copilot FAQ to know more about how this works. So how do you get started with it? How do you really install it, and how do you use it? All right. So let's take a very sneak peek into it. Very, very easy to use. For example, if you're using something like VS Code, you can install the GitHub Copilot extension from the marketplace, and you can sign into your GitHub account. You need to have the license for GitHub Copilot already purchased, and then that's about it. You can get started using it. Similarly, if you were using something like Visual Studio Code, you can similarly manage the extensions and install it accordingly. All right. All right. So that's quite a bit about a little bit background about GitHub Copilot. How do you install? How does it work, etc. But talking about the benefits itself, how does it really help, and what have we seen? And that's the main thing that I really want to talk about today. Is GitHub Copilot really helps boost developer productivity. Now, you might be thinking that, hey, of course, it's going to help boost my productivity if it's going to do all of the code writing for me and things like that, right? But there are a few other things also outside of just boosting developer productivity. For example, it can help you reduce context switching. So, to give you an example, right, in the 2022 Stack Overflow Developer Survey, uh, 63% of developers surveyed spend more than 30 minutes a day searching for answers or solutions to problems. And if you think about it, this is so much of cognitive load. You would have to switch out of an ID, search on the internet for how to implement some boilerplate code or solution, etc., and then come back and then try again, and then that cycle continues. And I'm sure when I said that, few of you might be smiling. You're like, aha, I know what you mean, right? And what it really um, happens is that a developer spends less time in the flow. I'm sure many of you would agree as well. When you're in the flow, when you're working on something, and then you're trying to get it done, it's all working fine. You have the solution, you're in the ID, you have your terminal open, right? You feel a lot more productive, and not just feel, you are productive. However, when there is so much of context switching happening, when you are jumping across to some example code or looking at some solution on an issue, heading over to Stack Overflow, wherever else it is, your productivity you would have seen decreases. So that's where something like GitHub Copilot helps developers spend more time thinking about the theory, the solution, and the code itself, all within the context of the IDE, rather than keep on switching the context. All right, a very, very important thing. Now, here's some more details that we have found from our own research. So if you go on GitHub.blog, sometime in September last year, we had published a blog article quantifying how GitHub Copilot can impact developer productivity and happiness. So if you look at it, right, so developers using GitHub Copilot have faster completion, exert less mental effort on repetitive tasks, spend less time searching, stay more in the flow, are more fulfilled with their job, and are also less frustrated when coding, right? So, whenever you have some of these solutions and you're able to get things done faster, right? You can see that it really helps developer productivity in a very, very large way. And what all of this really leads to is it really helps improve confidence, morale, and performance, and the psychological safety. So, and psychological safety really refers to the belief that you can say, speak up, ask questions, make mistakes, contribute without fear of punishment, humiliation, etc. So when developers or even generally employees feel safe to learn, ask questions, contribute and lead, etc., it just leads to not just an individual developer's productivity, but an overall confidence, morale, and performance as well. So again, this is one of the benefits that might have in a way been overseen. So what do you think about user sentiment? How do developers feel when it comes to using GitHub Copilot itself? In fact, in one of again our research and findings, we've seen that amongst developers who are using GitHub Copilot with Python, 40% of the code that they say was actually synthesized by GitHub Copilot. And I want to share one other interesting research, which is also there on github.blog, which you can go and read. We actually did one other survey and research and finding of our own, where we did a study with 95 developers to understand how helpful GitHub Copilot could be when performing common but really non-trivial tasks. So what we did was we split these developers into two groups and gave them a task. basically asked them to write an HTTP server from scratch. And again, to surprise, the group that actually used GitHub Copilot was able to complete the task 55% faster than the group that didn't use GitHub Copilot. All right, so they were able to complete, in around 71 minutes compared to 161 minutes in the group who weren't using GitHub Copilot in that study. So this really helps illustrate just how much time developers can lose or gain when needing to go through a whole lot of documentation or perform a repetitive task. And also, again, in contrast, GitHub Copilot helps maintain the flow and ultimately translate your innovative ideas into code. So, quite a bit about benefits and everything else. And I know you would be eager to go into one of the demos and take a look at how things are. But before that, let's see some of the examples in the wild, some interesting things that we have seen folks share when they've been using GitHub Copilot. All right, so we've seen folks use it for pattern recognition when folks are able to translate specific things and help understand pattern and then convert it. So, for example, something was written in French and then had to be converted over. So they shared it on Twitter for recognizing that pattern, how GitHub Copilot has helped. Or similarly, even GitHub Copilot that really helps in thoughts. Now, like I mentioned, GitHub Copilot was not really made for written prose, so we don't recommend it for documentation in the current state. However, it's really helpful in adding code snippets to your documentation. Here you can see Hayden show how they have benefited GitHub Copilot to add snippets to their documentation, etc. And if you just go searching on Twitter, you'll find a whole lot of examples. Again, how GitHub Copilot is really helping many different developers you really get that code written and better their productivity. So, in a nutshell, in addition to really boosting your confidence as you code and reducing your chances of making typos, right? GitHub Copilot can really help you, say, for example, brainstorm some ideas when you reach a mental block, and how you can you can use the suggestions feature within Copilot when you want to have an idea of how do you implement specific things, and then look at various different suggestions or alternatives of how to do it, right? It can also help you quickly jog your memory. For example, you might be writing something and then you might be wondering, I kind of forgot how to do that. And then Copilot can help you. And most importantly, retain the focus instead of jumping across your editor, your browser, and everywhere else, right? You can just stay in the flow. So we've seen that GitHub Copilot is helpful for new developers who are speaking a different language, developers who are programming in a new language, or even experienced developers who just want to use AI for some of the mundane and repetitive tasks, etc. So I know while I'm talking about all of these things, most of you might be thinking, hmm, but what about Copilot X? I'm sure you would have heard about that. And I want to take a few minutes to talk about Copilot X as well. So, well, GitHub Copilot X is essentially our vision for how AI powered software development would be. So, it's something that really brings along chat, terminal interfaces, support for pull requests, and early adoption of OpenAI's Chat GPT-4, like how I mentioned. GitHub Copilot is really our vision for how AI powered software development is and how it can be integrated into every part of your workflow. So there are a few things which are a part of this vision. And the first thing that you would have come across is, of course, Copilot Chat, where you can have a chat-like experience or chat experience in the IDE, where you can ask any generic questions, help generate unit tests, explain the code, ask GitHub Copilot to propose a fix for bug, or even help make the code robust or secure. So there's support for VS Code and Visual Studio, and voice to code with GitHub Copilot voice as well. So that's GitHub Copilot chat. There is also a vision for Copilot for pull requests, where we intend to really use AI to power pull requests, where it can automatically help suggest sentences and paragraphs as developers type based on the PR code changes. So really, really useful when you have made a code change and want to write what all code changes are part of the pull request, etc. Another part of the vision for Copilot X is also for docs, where bringing the power of GitHub Copilot to help answer questions based on documentation. So starting with docs for GitHub, React, Azure, MDN, etc., and maybe in the future your in-house docs. There is also again a vision for Copilot for the CLI to bring the power of AI and GitHub Copilot to the terminal, where it can suggest CLI commands in the terminal window itself for, say, general CLI or Git specific CLI or even GitHub specific CLI. So you can head over to gh.io/Copilot X, and Parth would share this within the chat as well. gh.io/Copilot X, where you can take a look at these preview features and a lot more, which are a part of the GitHub Copilot X vision. So one last thing that I want to mention before we head on to the demo is we've seen that recently also published a research study that GitHub Copilot is something that not just helps with developer productivity, but hugely, hugely contributes to the economy as well. So head over to github.blog and you can see an article of how GitHub Copilot can really help drive economic impact at a large scale as well. So there's a lot on github.blog for you to check out. So please do check that out as well. Anyway, that's for all of the theory and the presentation and everything behind the scenes for GitHub Copilot. Now let's jump into a demo to see some of this in action and how it's really going to help. So just give me a minute while I switch through my screens to bring up the demo. All right. So meanwhile, if you have any questions, please do put them in the chat, and happy to take it up towards the end of the session. All right. Okay. Great. So let me start sharing my screen again. Okay, so before I do that, I want to give you a quick idea of the demo. All right, so I'm going to be showing something in Python, which is just for the sake of comfort, not anything really to do with GitHub Copilot or the audience here. You can use it for a whole lot of languages. So let me quickly share my screen and we can get started. All right. So So one of the things, and you would have guessed, by seeing a telescope in my background, that I'm an astronomy enthusiast. And one of the things that I keep visiting is this astronomy picture of the day uh, by NASA, which collates, a whole lot of pictures. All right. Now, it's really good to know that NASA has an API for this where you can actually get all of the pictures through the API, even for past states. So let me just go back over here. And this is NASA's API where you can quickly grab an API key, etc. And you can see the first one itself is APOD, astronomy picture of the day. All right, which can be used, and there's the example image, a get request, and what are all the query parameters that can be used, etc. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to try and get a picture or maybe multiple pictures from this API and write a Python script to grab all of this through Copilot. Okay, so I'm going to open up Visual Studio Code. I have a directory already ready over here. So I'm going to create a new script called epod.py. Let me increase the size over here so you'll be able to see it. All right. So one of the first things is I'm just going to make sure that, all right, you can see here that GitHub Copilot is already enabled, the extension. So I'm going to say Python script to interesting. You see, I just have a pod there in the name of the script, and it's autocomplete saying to download the astronomy picture of the day from NASA. Great. That's exactly what I wanted. All right. So let me see what are the suggestions it gives me. Let me just hit on enter. All right. Request OS. Time. And these are all the suggestions, what you're seeing over here that's generated. So multiple, this is what I mentioned to you about multiple alternatives. Not much of an alternatives when it comes to import. It's pretty straightforward, but we take a look at it later on. So quite many libraries that it wants to import. It's fine. And let me see, what's the next suggestion? So it says parse command line arguments. Not something that I really wanted. What I want is, so I want to fetch today's state first. I'll say fetch today's state. All right. And yes, today, date time, it uses the date time library and then fetches today's state. Okay. And parse command line arguments. Not again something that I'm interested in. What I really want is to use this date and um, fetch today's picture of the day. All right. So instead, I'm gonna say, um, well, I'm gonna say endpoint for NASA's ePod API. All right, and there it is. Uh, doesn't seem to be the right one. I'm not sure. Let me just go back and then see. Oh, well, sorry, it is. It is NASA Planetary APOD. That's the right one. And let me go back using the API key from the environment variable. Yes, I have my API key in the environment variable. And here it is. It says endpoint is, this is the one, and environment variable is NASA API key. So there it is. Let me quickly check whether, this is there, and all right. Okay, so now I have this, and then I'm gonna see, great, get the response from the API. All right, so, well, it's interesting that it's saying URL live.request, but I really want to use the requests API instead of URL lib. So I'm going to say import request library, right? And I'm just going to let go of this. Okay, so get the response from the API, and then you see I actually updated the requests, and it has updated the suggestion as well. All right. So it says responses request.get endpoint. Okay, fine. But what about the parameters? All right, check if the response was successful. Okay, fine, maybe. And what is it supposed to do? You can see it is still, loading some suggestions, trying to see what needs to be done. And it has generated so much code right over here. All right. So if response is successful, it gets the data, gets the image URL, gets the image title, the explanation, the file name, file extension, file path, checks whether the directory exists or not, check if the image file exists, get the image from the URL, downloads the image as well, and print the image file path. So you see, it has generated all of these things. And if I don't want, I can actually just see all of these other suggestions that it would have generated as well. All right. So you can see if I scroll down, there could be some more, but I'm going to accept this. Okay. So let's go ahead and run this. Let's see what happens when we just run this Python script. Now, again, the only thing that I have really done is defined a few things of how I want to use it, and then it's generated everything. Now, I am in a way acting as the pilot. This seems okay, but I have to use my own judgment because I'm seeing, what all is being fetched, what all is not being fetched, etc., and then printing a few things. So let's go ahead and then run this. All right, and then see what happens. So you can see there is an images directory that got created over here. Most probably it's running the code somewhere over here, the maker one, to create the images directory, check if the image file exists. I don't think it exists already, so it's probably trying to download it, and it's able to uh, try to fetch this file and then save it locally. You can see it's opening the image file path as write in write mode in a binary, and then is going to write that. So let's give it a few seconds for it to come back. Now, one of the things that I might actually want to change is, well, I'm not sure if I mean, the script running so slow is probably because of request.get. Maybe something like curl might help make things much more faster, right? So let this script finish. But meanwhile, I actually want to say use curl to fetch this image and download it instead of request.get. All right. So you see, it actually downloaded successfully and saved it over here, which is the same file, which is today's file, which is there. All right. So if we go back to astronomy picture of the day, you can see it's the same beautiful aurora lights that are there, which the script has fetched. The nice thing is, I didn't know anything about the API when I started. I just asked for the endpoint. It gave me the endpoint. I had just loaded my API key, and it has generated everything that's needed. Okay. Now, again, as the pilot, as the programmer, I want to make a change over here. I don't think using request.get is good. I want to use curl, which is probably faster. All right. So let's probably use Copilot Chat to rewrite this instead of Copilot Autocomplete. All right. So, so now what I'm going to do is I will select this and open up Copilot Chat. Okay. And what I'm going to say is rewrite this code to use, or rather, to download image using curl instead of request.get. All right. And it's going to look at the modified code, and it says, this is what you can probably use. However, you see, it is probably referring to something else rather than this specific code, right? So that's where I have to really use my judgment and rewrite this part of the code. So what I'm gonna do is um, instead of this specific code, I am gonna remove all of this. I'm not gonna, uh, check any of the downloads or anything else. I'm just gonna use uh, this specific code, download the image using curl. All right. So I'm gonna replace this with download the image using curl. Um, just going to format that. And once that's done, again, I will remove this part, and well, can I just remove this, get image URL. I'm just cleaning up the code to make sure it's readable. And then I'm going to say check if the image file exists and print a success message, right? And then it sees whether the path exists of the image file path, and then it says, well, image has been successfully downloaded. And you see, it's also including the image title, the image explanation, and everything else, right? So I'm gonna accept that, and let me go ahead and first clean up this one, because the image already exists and that code path might not get executed. Again, this is where the judgment of a programmer needs to come in. So I'm going to just move this to trash and rerun this code. All right. So you can see curl got executed, and all right, my judgment worked out fine. Curl has been much more faster than request.get. And you can see over here that it has given me the image title, the explanation, and everything else. Well, great. Now, what if I want to take this one step further, and if I want to get all of the images and just download them for, say, the past 1 week? All right. It's obvious that again, as a programmer, there are two ways probably to do it. One is a very naive way of mentioning all of the dates and then saying that, okay, get run this whole code again for every date, or probably just doing a for loop, or whatever iteration loop, right? So what I'm going to do now is I want to do that and grab all of the images for the past 7 days. But before that, um, let me just get rid of this explanation part in the print, because it's a long text. And what I'm going to do is, let me ask Copilot Chat to see if it can give me the same code to run for the past 7 days instead of 1 day, because you see this today is actually not getting used anywhere. So let me give this a shot. I'm going to select this whole code. Let me go to Copilot Chat and then ask this, rewrite this code to fetch images for the past 7 days. All right. And let me see if it's able to give me. And wow, it is able to give me the entire code, which is rewritten by using an iteration loop. So you see it says set the number of days endpoint, the range, and it uses the date and changes the endpoint date as well. Okay. So it's very, very easy to bring something like this into your code. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to use this insert at cursor, and the whole code gets updated. So you can see there is the same endpoint which is there, and there is a range of num days. There is the date minus the time delta which is there, and it's adding that to the endpoint, creating a full endpoint, and then fetching that endpoint, and then doing everything else as the same. And you see it's using curl here as well, which was what my original code had. Very beautifully rewritten the code. So let me go ahead and run this again. But before that, let me just clean up whatever is existing over here and run the script again. So great. It's the first image which is being downloaded. Um, and Interesting. It's probably only one image that got downloaded and not the remaining ones. All right. So you see, there is probably something that's going wrong in this iteration, which you as a programmer have to go ahead and really fix it. All right. So that's where a lot of your judgment comes into play of how you want to handle some of these things. All right, now I'm not going to go into debugging all of these things right now. If you do find out somewhere over here is where the error is, then do let me know. All right. So that's what I have for you right now, for um, all of the GitHub Copilot, and happy to get into the questions for now. So let me take a look at the questions and part. Feel free to bring up any of the questions that are there in chat, and happy to answer them. Can you share the link to the blog you talked about? Absolutely. So if you go into github.blog, you will be able to just search for, say, Copilot, and you can find this, the economic impact of AI powered developer lifecycle, that you can see. You can see example of how to use prompts, tips, use cases. You can see the inside of GitHub working with LLMs behind GitHub Copilot, and a whole lot of other blogs which are available, which you get just fine. So go ahead and then to GitHub blog and then filter as Copilot, and you'll be able to find it. Any other questions? What are the limitations of Copilot X? All right, now there are a couple of things. So Copilot X, like how I mentioned, is a vision for how we want Copilot to really help with developer productivity, and the multiple things which I showed you. There's chat, Copilot for pull requests, and docs, etc. They're still in very, very, very early stages, and we are still working on continuously improving them based on feedback. What about the security of Copilot? All right, like how I mentioned a key thing is that we never store any of the code that is being used by Copilot. Great, that's what I was talking about. So it's ephemeral, as and when the suggestion is delivered to you, that's when that specific context doesn't exist with us. It's only used for that short amount of time to generate the suggestion based on the context, but that code is not stored anywhere. So I also want to point you to, oops, sorry, the Copilot page itself, which has some of these questions, some of the featured questions in terms of the privacy parts, whether it will be shared with other users, how is this transmitted and protected, and also can it really introduce insecure code, who owns that, the training set and everything else. So a whole lot of some of the common questions which are there over here, which I encourage you to take a look at as well. All right. How far are we from a world where an entirely non-tech person can just fire up the IDE with Copilot and ask it to write the code they want? Good question. Well, I I don't have a crystal ball, so very difficult to predict what's going to happen in the future. However, I want to re-emphasize this, like how I showed in the demo right now. Right, there's a whole lot of judgment calls that one as a developer and a programmer has to do, because some of the code that's suggested, right, could be, say, syntactically correct but logically incorrect, could be logically correct or maybe even syntactically incorrect, etc. So that's where, or probably it's a very very naive way to do something where you would really need human judgment to decide whether this is the right way to do it or not. So multiple other ways where a human has to be involved to really make the best use of it. However, well, we don't know what the future holds for AI. How to, I'm not sure whether it's how to measure or how do you measure the productivity boost happened due to AI pair programmer. Okay, good question. So now I mentioned to you about the research that I spoke about and which we did, where we used the time to completion to accomplish the specific task as a way of productivity, right? However, there are multiple different metrics that each organization would use to define what productivity means for them. For example, there could be multiple ways. Say, if you are using something like issues, from the time when an issue is created to when it is closed, that specific cycle could be a measure of productivity, or it could be when a specific architecture or a solution or an approach for a problem is decided, how much time does it take to implement that, or you could think about how much time is saved. All right. So multiple different ways um, to kind of first define developer productivity, which is very unique to each organization based on how many developers that they have, the product, their internal processes that they use. So that's one thing, defining developer productivity. The second thing is really looking at um, one, what was the productivity like as a baseline, a benchmark, without having an AI paid programmer like GitHub Copilot, and after using it, how much are similar tasks taking. So that was a very similar way how we measured in the research that I mentioned as well, where we had two groups of developers, one almost as like a control group who took a certain amount of time without using GitHub Copilot, and one more with using GitHub Copilot. If you have the same number of developers, right? If you have already those baseline and benchmarks for developers accomplishing a certain task without Copilot, you can you can actually experiment and then try using with GitHub Copilot for similar tasks, and then measure that based on historical productivity. So we have 3 more minutes. Happy to take on any other um, questions. All right. So, so with that, we come to the end. And like how I mentioned, if there are any other questions, one, please feel free to check out this page, github.com/features/copilot, which talks about some of the basics of GitHub Copilot, and the organizations who are using it currently, the documentation for it, the pricing for individuals and businesses, some of the examples, and there's also a story for how Mercado Libre has used it for their own processes, some of the FAQs, and for Copilot X, like how I mentioned to you about. Just head over to gh.io/Copilot X, and you'll be able to take a look at some of the features that are a part of the Copilot X vision, in terms of using Copilot Chat for CLI, etc. And you can get onto the wait list. There's also GitHub Next, where you can see a whole lot of other projects that are being experimented as, for example, Copilot for pull requests, which I mentioned about, is within the waitlist. Copilot for docs, Copilot Voice, which is there, and multiple other projects which are a part of GitHub Next. So definitely do check that out, and check out the GitHub blog as well, where you can find a whole lot of articles on Copilot and multiple other GitHub products as well. So thank you for that. And before signing off, please feel free to reach out to me on Twitter, GitHub, or LinkedIn. I'm there as at MV Karan on all of them. Happy to take the conversation forward. And thank you so much, Microsoft Reactor, and thanks, Path, for hosting me for this session. Um, Back to you, and over to you, Path. Hey, Path, back to you.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for attending us today, and thank you, Karan, for a very exciting session. And yes, we have shared few links over there which can take your learning further. And if you all still have any questions, please do reach out, Karan. I have shared his link, or shared his LinkedIn link. Feel free to reach him out. And yes, thank you all once again. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you, Karan.
Thanks, everyone, and appreciate